Hi everyone, it's John. I have another book review for you today. I have always seen the name of Michael Oakeshott sort of floating around. I knew he was a political philosopher, somewhat of a thinker about education and culture too. But outside of a couple of essays, namely Rationalism in Politics, which I read a while ago, which is supposed to be one of well, it is a longer essay and it's supposed to be one of the more important ones. I hadn't read any book-length pieces by him, and I guess this doesn't really count either. It's a collection of lectures that he gave called "Sorry for the Glare." That's not the title of the book. The title is "The Voice of Liberal Learning" by Michael Oakeshott. And you can see at the bottom there, foreword and introduction by Timothy Fuller. This is a collection of 6 essays by Michael Oakeshott, all published between 1949 and 1975, that were collected by Timothy Fuller and put together and published by the Liberty Fund. Most of them cover subjects of philosophy of education, the meaning and purpose of a university, what it means to occupy the role of a teacher and of a student, and whatever it might mean to be liberally educated. The last essay kind of veers off from these directions and takes up the question of political socialization. So just to summarize the essays and distill any one message is kind of impossible because of the way that Oakeshott is not really, you can't really peg him down. He's very often thought of, might be why you can find him at the Liberty Fund, several books by him at the Liberty Fund. He's very often thought of as a conservative, but there are some ways in which he's not very conservative at all. So it makes him interesting to read. But it's clear from Oakeshott's voice that he is kind of nostalgic for what education was until very recently. Under pressure to pick out one sort of overarching theme, I would say it's probably trying to bridge the gap between universalism and historicism. In other words, seeing a certain strain of traditionalism that argues for eternal human verities, truths, values as overgeneralizations about what is only local and contingent, while seemingly favoring a curriculum that is deeply conscious of its own cultural heritage and inheritance. He resists ever becoming maudlin and remains deeply pragmatic about his diagnoses of the problem of education. Instead of just being doctrinaire and dogmatic, I think his pragmatism is really something that he drives home. Oakeshott is resentful of what was for him the recent trend of the increasing purpose-driven nature of the university. By which I mean, you go to university, everyone heard this in the United States in the last, 30 or 40 years, maybe longer. You go to university to get a good job, to raise a family, to buy a house, and your 2 or 3 cars, and go on vacation once or twice a year, and that's why you go to school. A true conservative, Oakeshott, remains highly suspicious of government's encroachments in education. And he says in one of the essays, quote, "Modern governments are not interested in education. They are concerned only to impose socialization of one kind or another upon the surviving fragments of a once considerable educational engagement," end quote. He especially disdains the increasing prevalence of courses meant for remedial learning and the blurring of the lines between the traditional 4-year liberal arts university and the trade school, which seems to disappear. The line separating them seems to continue to disappear with each passing year. Through and with this philosophy of education, Oakeshott circumscribes what it means to be a human being. He thinks coming to assimilate the tradition into which we're born in order to cultivate a set of tools that aid us in the act of self-reflection is a uniquely human activity. In defining what he thinks as human and what makes us human, he's particularly drawn to the dialectical nature of this learning and of this self-criticism and self-introspection, continually referring to it as a conversation that becomes more and more enriched the further that we can move away from the trivialities of quotidian life. It's hard to imagine the American university looking anything like the idealized type that Oakeshott sets out to detail in this book. Its tool, like used to socialize, to create a modern citizen, to shape students into job seekers in the marketplace. All of these sort of teleological driven goals that we hear the university should be responsible for, these are sort of unquestioned these days. And he's very disappointed with the fact that the university isn't just some place where you can go and engage with the tradition and learn more about yourself as you do it. There is no idyllic time that we can point back to and say, this was when the university functioned exactly the way it should. This is another thing that makes him different from many conservatives. He doesn't point back to, say, the 17th century and say, this is when the universities were at their peak and was the perfect time to be a university student or to be a professor in one. He says that universities always had their problems, but problems just change with the time and with the culture, but that there was no such perfect institution. And he thinks that to adopt such a misconception of the perfect university would be to fall prey to the exact kind of ahistorical, uncritical thinking that he warns about. I would really, really recommend this book, especially as an introduction to Oakeshott. Of course, there's not much concerning his political philosophy in it, but if you're interested in what he thinks about education and the university and trends that he began to see in, between 1949 and 1975, the middle third of the 20th century, it's really a great place to start, especially as a contrast to other conservative voices writing in that period, who were a bit more stentorian and screechy in their diagnoses of educational problems. As conservative as Oakeshott undeniably is, in these 6 pieces, he never lets his ideas become old or ossify or become inconsequential, which is a more forgiving assessment than I think we could give to some of his American contemporaries. I'm looking at you, Alan Bloom. Personal opinion, but from Liberty Fund, The Voice of Liberal Learning, 6 essays by Michael Oakeshott, with a foreword and introduction by Timothy Fuller. I will see you next week. Bye.